Buenos días a todas las personas que nos acompañan esta mañana en nuestro ciclo de conferencias Después del 2030, Mujeres, líderes por un futuro sustentable. El doctor Keno Yama, secretario de la Secretaría de Desarrollo Institucional, no podrá estar con nosotros esta mañana, pero me pidió darle la bienvenida a nuestra invitada, la doctora Vandana Shiva. Mi nombre es Alexandra Aguilar Bellamy y soy la actual coordinadora de la Coordinación Universitaria para la Sustentabilidad de nuestra máxima casa de estudios de México. Para conmemorar un día tan importante como el Día Mundial de la Tierra, en la Coordinación Universitaria para la Sustentabilidad consideramos que invitar a la doctora Vandana Shiva era la mejor forma de celebrar. Y nos da mucho gusto que nos acompañen en esta celebración. Aprovecho para agradecer a la doctora Adelita San Vicente Tello de la Semarnat por facilitar la comunicación con la doctora Shiva. Dr. Shiva, it is an honor for the Coordination Office for Sustainability at UNAM that you have accepted our invitation to be a keynote speaker in celebration of the World Earth Day. Our university community is quite eager to listen to you. This is not surprising. Much of the issues affecting India's small-scale farmers and devastation of ecological resources highlighted in your work also affect Mexico's ecosystems, biological resources, farmers, especially women, and our natural resources. Many of the theoretical concepts introduced or defended years ago by Dr. Shiva are part of today's mainstream academic narrative. Terms regarding biopiracy, or the unlawful appropriation of biodiversity's genetic resources, ecofeminism, capitalist patriarchalism, agroecology, organic farming, or setting up ethical boundaries to achieve economic democracy, sustainability, justice, and peace are some of her principal contributions. Dr. Shiva's work invites us to deconstruct dominant narratives around development, economic growth, food production, gender, and need. Some of her latest work address issues that should worry all of us: the unequal distribution and the concentration of wealth and resources in the 1% of the world's population, our lack of autonomy to produce our own food, the deterioration of our livelihood ecosystems, the depletion of biodiversity that builds and sustains food chains, the irreversible effects that industrial agriculture is having in our soils, and to the diversity of the world's biological resources are part of Dr. Shiva's urgent calls to action to all humankind. She's pressing for people to rise up and fight to defend the Earth's rights, and at the same time to uphold the just distribution of resources, not depending on the market or the politics of identity, but on the fair share that every human being should receive. I will now read Dr. Vandana Shiva's short bio in Spanish for our audience, and will then give her the floor to listen to the conference she has prepared for us entitled Earth Rising, Women Rising. La doctora Vandana Shiva estudió física y posteriormente realizó un doctorado en torno a la no localización de variables escondidas en la teoría cuántica en la Universidad de Western Ontario en Canadá. Más adelante, llevó a cabo investigaciones interdisciplinarias en ciencia, tecnología y políticas ambientales en el Indian Institute of Science y en el Indian Institute of Management en Bangalore. En 1982, fundó la Fundación para la Investigación sobre Ciencia, Tecnología y Ecología en Dehradún, dedicada a abordar los problemas ecológicos y sociales más importantes de nuestro tiempo, en estrecha colaboración con comunidades locales y movimientos sociales. En 1991, fundó Navdanya, un movimiento para proteger la diversidad y la integridad de los recursos biológicos, especialmente las semillas nativas, promover la agricultura orgánica y el comercio justo. En 2004, en colaboración con el Schumacher College del Reino Unido, fundó Villa Vidyapeth, una universidad internacional para la vida sostenible en el Valle de Dun, en la India. La revista Time identificó a la doctora Shiva como una heroína ambiental. la revista Asia Week la ha calificado como una de las 5 comunicadoras más poderosas de Asia y la revista Forbes la denominó como una de las 7 mujeres más poderosas del mundo. Ha recibido doctorados honoris causa de la Universidad de París, la Universidad de Western Ontario, la Universidad de Oslo, el Connecticut College y la Universidad de Guelph en Canadá. Entre sus muchos premios se encuentran el Premio Nobel Alternativo, otorgado en 1993, la Orden del Arca Dorada, el Premio Global 500 de Naciones Unidas y el Premio Internacional del Día de la Tierra. Doctora Vandana Shiva, le damos la más cordial bienvenida. Dr. Shiva, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Night to you. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and greetings to all of you for Mother Earth Day. I have always felt very, very close to Mexico, because even though we are two ends of the globe, we have such similarity. We are the land, cultures. Even when we've been separated from the land, our consciousness has been in the land. And we've always recognized the severe crises that we are facing and looked for solutions. Today, we are facing an existential crisis with multiple emergencies. There's not one single crisis threatening human survival and the survival of other species. 1 million species are threatened with extinction. 200 are going extinct every day. The present path of humanity is clearly on a non-sustainable way, because it is destroying life on Earth, which supports life. And sustainability for me has always meant that which sustains. And for me, women have always been the experts in the economy of sustenance. I've always seen, since I started my work on ecology, us being simultaneously in 3 economies. The economy of nature, without whom we would not have air to breathe and water to drink and food, or real identity, the identity of being Earth citizens. Then there's the sustenance economy. And this economy is predominantly a women's economy. I had a dear friend, Hilka, who passed away a few years ago from Finland. She'd done a study on how 80% of the real economy, if you count the work, the energy, the production of goods and services, is a women's economy. And she called it the free economy. And then she called that which is locked to the market as the enslaved economy, because it's enslaved to powers bigger than you. And basically, we had, it's grown into a pyramid which has become inverted, because we've given priority only to the market, only to commercial flows in the market, commodity flows in the market, through extraction from the earth, which has led to the ecological crisis and the depletion of nature's economy. And it has led to the poverty crisis, a depletion of the social economy, the sustenance economy. And the market has grown, but the financial market has grown even bigger. It's 100 times bigger than the real goods and services in the world. And now that it's all being digitalized through fintech or through Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, that fictitious wealth can be manufactured millions-fold. But the breath flow cannot be multiplied a millionfold. We have to maintain the cycle of life in order to have enough for all. All of these multiple emergencies come up from a group of false assumptions. The idea of a dead earth. All our cultures have thought of the earth as living. And that's why we have finally a waking up to Mother Earth. I've been through the process over the last few decades, where many of us started to work on the recognition of the rights of Mother Earth. And my Western friends used to resist and say, no, we can't talk about her as a mother. Let's talk about nature. I said, but the word nature has been so messed up that you will never be able to understand nature's living because you killed her. And finally, the rights of Mother Earth has been recognized by the UN. Mother Earth, Terra Madre, Pachamama, Gaia, Terra, Earth, Kre, Dunya, Prithvi, Bhumi, Vasundhara. Vasundhara leads to Vasudhaiva Kutumbaka, the family of the earth. That's what we are. And in our cultures, we weren't divided, either on the principle of anthropocentrism, that we are superior to other species, or on ecological apartheid, that we are separate from nature, or the constructs of human apartheid, that just because we are different in color, in language, in race, we are inferior. These hierarchies are totally constructs of colonialism. Apartheid, the word was created by the Afrikaans when they were colonizing South Africa. And it means apartness, separateness. Yeah. So first they put past laws to make themselves separate from the Indian community that created the trade and businesses there. And, sadly, even the plantations. And then when they had taken the land from the Black Africans, but with industrialization needed labor for mining, labor for plantations, that's when they created the apartheid formally of making Blacks an inferior class who were the original owners of the land. The enclosures of the commons was very much part of it, and the creation of private property through the enclosures of the commons. I know definitely in my land was not owned privately. It was used privately, and the community decided the use, and it was hereditary. And I'm sure that's what common lands were. And I remember it was NAFTA, which made a change in land laws. The community lands, which could never be bought and sold, were put on the market. And in no time, the economy of Mexico was dismembered. My colleague Maria Meeks and we wrote the book Ecofeminism. We referred to this anti-nature, anti-women, anti-life ideology of colonizing commerce as capitalist patriarchy. Patriarchy in capitalist form, where the purpose is making money. That's the only purpose. How did it operate? Greedy bourgeois men were made the unit and the model of what economy is. And this was elevated to the fiction of a corporation, beginning with the East India Company, chartered 1600. Colonization, for us, it doesn't take much to realize that capitalism, colonization are all the same thing, because the East India Company was our colonizer. We did not separate capitalism from colonialism because the same patriarchal structure, same structure destroyed India. The British took $45 trillion out of India in the 200 years they ruled us. We were the richest country of the world, 25% of the world economy, and they left us with 2%. In these structures of capitalist patriarchy were very, very carefully constructed assumptions, illusions. The construction of the earth as dead matter. Bacon said, we have to subjugate the earth, and he wrote a book, The Masculine Birth of Time, declaring knowledge of oneness with the earth, non-separation, as effeminate. Women, like us, 500 years ago, were burnt in Europe as witches for knowing too much, but too much of the real knowledge, because there was a fake knowledge being substituted in its place. Or Descartes, who said there's only extension. There's no life, there's no quality, there's no sentience. And Locke, who said, what creates property is the spiritual labor of the one who owns the land and the woman and the peasant. And Adam Smith, who said we are born with greed from the mothers of our womb. Competition and greed is our essential selfish nature. Now, if, as our economies have been in indigenous cultures, and as we are shaping today as women, Mother Earth and a mother in a household were treated as the unit of the economy, we would not be able to assume greed and selfishness as the basic human nature. We would recognize it is giving and love and compassion and caring that makes us human. And that really is our task over the next decade, to shift from the violence of capitalist patriarchy that is both violent to women and violent to the earth, to recognizing that the earth is alive, that we are part of nature, we are not separate from her, that this interconnectedness through life is part of our life, and we are alive, we are autonomous, we are thinking, we are intelligent. We are not dead passive objects to be owned and manipulated. Not nature, not her sentient beings, not women. If you just look at some of the key Sustainable Development Goals, you can trace their roots to this thinking. And there is no way you can make these SDGs in true honesty. You can double speak on the SDGs to continue on this path of extinction, but to truly address poverty and hunger and health and well-being, and address inequality and address climate change and address the care of the oceans, the care of terrestrial biodiversity, we need to make a serious shift. I'm trained in quantum theory, but for the last 37 years now, I have studied agriculture because my country faced two of the biggest violent tragedies in 1984. Interestingly, very Orwellian 1984. In the state of Punjab, where the Green Revolution was first introduced, where, interestingly, this is another connection that we need to be much more conscious about between Mexico and India, and it is something I would really like to develop with UNAM a lot more, with Adelita, dear Adelita, who's responsible for this connection. So the wars had been fought, Hitler was over, but the chemicals that had been used in Hitler's concentration camps and the wars had these vested interests. I call them the Poison Cartel. The Poison Cartel, you're trying to ban making of glyphosate, the making of GMOs, the buyers in Monsanto. And I know the vicious attacks that are being made on Mexico for choosing her sovereign path, in alignment with Mother Earth, in alignment with the rights of people to their health and well-being. And I want to pay a tribute to all of you who have worked to bring Mexico to the state where A, you can say corn is our heritage. B, you can say we will not allow GMOs. C, you can say we're going to get rid of this terribly ecocidal chemical called Roundup, whose main property is to kill everything green when we need everything green to run the cycles of life. But it has other effects. It is, we now know, carcinogenic, and Bayer was brought to its knees because of the cancer cases in the United States. They tried their best to have the rulings overturned, but with the first case, they have, Johnson's case, they have totally lost. The distillation of the ideas of nature is dead and humans as greedy and competition as our nature, that distillation, when transferred into agriculture, is what has given us the violence that I witnessed in my country in 1984. And I was working for the United Nations University that time on a program called Conflicts Over Natural Resources. And I said to them, I said, there's something going on here I need to study more deeply. It's not an obvious sort of conflict over land or conflict over forest, but it is a conflict over waters for sure. People were killed around dams and rivers. And then by the end of that year, 2nd of December, 1984, the pesticide plant of Union Carbide, now owned by Dow, which is merged with DuPont, and they formed Corteva. You know, they're now four giants that control our seed and food. Bayer with Monsanto, Dow, DuPont as Corteva, Syngenta, which was already a merger of 4 companies, you know, Ciba, Sandoz, AstraZeneca, they became Syngenta, and now Syngenta has merged with ChemChina. And then because of antitrust, many of them have spun off their little pieces to BASF. So these four giants control all the seed of the world and all the agrochemicals and poisons of the world. I first came to know about them when I was researching the Green Revolution. And the Green Revolution is the connection between Mexico and India, because this poison cartel that really drove industrial agriculture and chemical farming and the destruction of small-scale farming and ecological agriculture was looking for markets after the war. After, once the wars were over, IG Farben had been tried in Nuremberg, and the International Human Rights Declaration came out of that. But these same people who were tried in Nuremberg then became the agri-chemical giants. But they don't call themselves the poison cartel. I do. They call themselves the plant protection group called Crop Life. They double speak is such a big part of what they do. So I realized that they mobilized after the war to push chemicals into our countries through the so-called Green Revolution. Fake green, anti-green. And Borlaug, who got the Nobel Peace Prize for doing this work, was actually working for DuPont Defense Labs. And with the US foreign policy and DuPont Defense Lab, they created a unit which then eventually evolved into CIMMYT. But he was based in the University of Chipingo, and I was very honored to be in the university to celebrate 25 years of the agroecology program out there. So what was Borlaug's work? Borlaug's work was push the chemicals. But just like your maises are tall because you maximize the biomass, and your maize grows in the milpa system with the beans and the pumpkins. If you have to apply chemicals and external inputs, you have to have monocultures. You've got to destroy the milpa. You've got to destroy the navdanya, which means 9 seeds. But then you've got to destroy the native seed, because the native seeds, when you apply chemicals, because our seeds are bred for fodder for animals, for food of not just one kind, but many kinds of food for us. And nitrogen fertilizer has a property of weakening the cell walls. And therefore, when nitrogen fertilizer applied, the plants lodge. Ordinarily, in our fields in organic farming, our native seeds do not lodge. They lodge when chemical fertilizers are applied. So instead of saying, let's get rid of the chemical fertilizers, they said, let's change the plant. And the dwarf varieties were created for this problem of lodging. And the dwarf wheats were created in CIMMYT by Norman Borlaug to push on India. In 1965, you had a drought. The prices of food were rising. India said, send us a little more wheat to the Americans. And they said, we won't send you wheat. You've got to take the chemicals. You've got to change your agriculture. Our prime minister of that time said, I cannot experiment with such a large agrarian community. I can do an experiment, but if it does well for us, we'll adopt it. But if it is harmful, we will not. He died mysteriously in Tashkent during a peace talk, At night, his relatives said, I had his niece with me in university, and they said the body came back purple, poisoned. But we said no, and then we were still forced. The Green Revolution was pushed on us. And with it came an entire fake science. But that fake science is continuing because one had thought that everyone now realized that chemical farming, fossil fuel agriculture is at the heart of so many of the underminings of the objectives of the SDGs. Take poverty. Why are farmers poor? If they have to buy seed, if they have to buy chemicals, they'll be poor because their scarce incomes are flowing out. In addition, if they are in a globalized commodity flow, the 5 giants, a Cargill will determine the price of corn, not the local market. BlackRock will decide the price of soybean. So there is no way between rising prices and falling rising prices, costs of production, and falling prices of what they produce, the farmers are trapped in a negative economy. And that's the reason they're leaving agriculture. Agriculture itself is not unviable. Industrial, globalized agriculture makes it unviable. So poverty is totally related to this industrial agriculture. Hunger. If you are growing commodities that are nutritionally empty, and now the research is there, and I hope you now will take this forward, please do research on your native maises and you will find they're rich in nutrition. Do organic maises, you'll find they're rich in nutrition. Native seeds and organic farming increases the nutrition in our food. These Green Revolution varieties and GMO seeds are nutritionally empty. And then when you grow them chemically, chemicals deprive the soil of nutrition, therefore they deprive the plants of nutrition, therefore they deprive us of nutrition. And so we have not just a nutrition crisis, a hunger crisis. I have watched farmers who have abundant rice in their farms, but they're hungry because they're indebted for chemicals and they have to sell their wheat immediately to pay back the debt for the chemicals. And then they buy at 1/4 the amount. You know, you sell at 2 rupees, you buy at 10 rupees, you're going to be hungry. That is why of the 1 billion people, 250 million are farmers, are growers of food. But if they grow food in an industrial system, they'll be hungry or take disease and ill health. We are living through a pandemic. The research is all showing that for the last 30 years, there have been multiple pandemics. Zika, Ebola, SARS, H1N1, Zika, the names carry on, all related to the fact that agribusiness invaded into the forest to grow more commodities. And from there jumped these viruses, which got amplified in factory farming and had gain in function research through genetic engineering. But the original invasion into the forests is because of agribusiness. Amazon is being destroyed for GMO soya. The Indonesian rainforests, which will disappear by 2030, are being destroyed for palm oil. We don't need palm oil. We have enough oil seeds everywhere in the world. Europe has its olive oil. We have the mustard and the coconut and the sesame and the Niger and the linseed, hundreds of ways in which we can generate our food. But the same junk food, and I know Mexico is suffering this too, the rates of obesity have shot up since free trade. When your corn was destroyed, junk food became the staple. I remember I fought Coca-Cola, and we shut Coca-Cola plants down in India. And I remember during that time reading that Coca-Cola had mined the water in so many places in Mexico, and now they were selling Coca-Cola bottles because there was no drinking water. But Coca-Cola is a recipe for obesity. The chronic disease epidemic, which is aggravating the deaths due to the pandemic, are all related to an unhealthy diet. But cancer related to toxics, obesity, diabetes related to the destruction of our metabolic system, endocrine disruptors, infertility, neurological problems, neurodegenerative diseases from autism to Parkinson's to Alzheimer's, exploding. The graphs are like this. They're like that. And when you think of the fact that health and well-being is supposed to be met, there's no way within the industrial system we are ever going to fulfill that. Take inequality. My book, Oneness versus 1%, I've shown that deregulation of the last 30 years has created this class of billionaires who now invest their private money, who first of all evade taxes anyway, they pay no taxes. And they invest their money through the new financial asset management firms like BlackRock, like Vanguard, who then own the biggest shares of all the corporations, 30% of the Coca-Colas and the McDonald's. So they drive the economy, including the food economy, into directions where the planet's health and our health is destroyed and inequality grows. The billionaires get richer and richer and richer. And if you just look at the data during the lockdown where people lost their livelihoods, the billionaires walked away with $1 trillion more. How could 10 people who do nothing? Because for me, work is I've studied physics. Work is exercising energy, Using the energy of your body is work. You measure it in joules. You don't measure it in billions made through extraction of royalties. That's not work. That's extraction. That's rent collection. That's speculation. That's gambling. Climate, 50% of the greenhouse gases come from this system. I've done a book called Soil, Not Oil. And I wrote it before the lead up to the Copenhagen Climate Summit. At that time, it was less. The figures were a little less. They were 45, now they're 50. And a lot of people only measure the production in agriculture. But the food system is how you produce your food, if it's fossil fuel intensive, and if it is intensive in chemicals, all of which are based on fossil fuels. Synthetic fertilizers are based on fossil fuels. 1 kilogram of nitrogen is used. 2 liters of diesel are used to produce 1 kilogram of nitrogen. This system emits 11 to 15% of the greenhouse gases, which are not just carbon dioxide. There's a lot of carbon reductionism in the climate debate. Of course, there's carbon dioxide. When you're using fossil fuels, there will be more carbon emissions. But even more deadly than carbon dioxide is nitrous oxide, 300 times more damaging for the stability of the atmosphere. And it is emitted from synthetic fertilizers. 15% is what the system was. And methane comes largely from factory farms, not from free-range animals. And FAO, I had a debate. So how do you know? I said, well, I grew up with cows and they didn't stink. But I go past your CAFOs, the concentrated animal farm operations, and they stink. You can't grow past them. Yeah? And you want me to believe that the cows I grew up with, which never stank, emitted methane? And, we are being the biggest capitalist patriarch of our times is now one of the richest men called Bill Gates. He's setting the agenda on sustainability in this book, How to Avoid Climate Disaster. And I'll just show you 2 pages, just 2 pages. Animal energy is the alternative to fossil fuel. He says they must go, they must disappear. We are a land of plows and bullocks. And then we know synthetic fertilizers emit nitrous oxide, and he says this is the future to solve climate change. Now remember, Norman Borlaug pushed the Green Revolution on Mexico and India for this chemical, to adapt the plants to sell more of this. And here now you have Bill Gates, who's pushing the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa to push more of it. Land use change, deforestation, destruction of forests, which also lead to pandemics, 15 to 20%. Processing, transport, packaging, retail. You have beautiful markets. We have beautiful markets. That's the way we should be distributing our food, as much as possible locally, the rest regionally. We should have national sovereignty, and only a few things should go beyond. But when you think of it, when a good food like your avocado, delicious foods you have in Mexico, is turned into a global commodity, I have paid tribute to the defenders of the monarch butterfly in the forest, who were killed for the expansion of avocado plantations into forests. So you can take something good and turn it into a destructive if it breaks all the limits. All of this is 20%, waste is 4%. So we have a 50% contribution to climate change. But the same system is destroying the oceans. Those synthetic fertilizers that Bill Gates loves are running off and creating dead zones. In the Gulf of Mexico, it's a dead zone. All of the chemicals brought by the Mississippi. And the area keeps growing. Wherever synthetic fertilizer runoff is there, it's a dead zone. And then terrestrial biodiversity. why has most of the biodiversity disappeared? First, because you created a green revolution and GMOs whose job was to destroy biodiversity and promote monocultures. And the Plant Genetic Resources meeting at Leipzig acknowledged that 75% biodiversity of plants had gone because of the green revolution. Its design was to displace biodiversity. But when you use pesticides and treat all insects as your enemies, you're going to have an insectigodon. So they're disappearing. When you apply synthetic fertilizers, the soil, which is an amazing living food web, the soil biodiversity starts to die. So whether it's plants or soil organisms or insects or birds, chemical pesticides and herbicides are an instrument of killing. You cannot meet the SDGs within the system. But we, as women, are meeting the SDGs. Our work in Navdanya, I began working in Navdanya for a very, very simple task of saving the seeds. And why was I saving the seeds? Because the Poison Cartel in 1987 had said, oh, we're too poor. We've got to become richer. We've got to own the seed. Therefore, we've got to push GMOs so we can patent them. And we must have a global treaty, the intellectual property agreement of the WTO. And I said, but you don't make the seed. It's not a machine. And I dedicated my life since then to protect the seed, create community seed banks. We created 150 community seed banks in India. But also work with my government to pass laws, work with governments everywhere to pass laws like the Convention on Biological Diversity, laws like the protocol, the biosafety protocol under that convention. And of course, there's the Nagoya Protocol. We now find that if farmers save their own seeds, if farmers do ecological farming, and I started to promote organic farming because I wanted farmers to use their seeds in their production system, not save their seeds as a museum. I said, if it's a museum, they'll stop. So to make sure they keep growing their seeds, I said, this is the reason you must grow it. You can do better. And our farmers are earning 10 times more than the commodity growing farmers using chemical farming, 10 times more. We have a book called Wealth Per Acre on true cost accounting. Zero hunger, we can reach it. When you intensify biodiversity on your farms and you do MILPA, the MILPA path and the Navdanya path, that should be the path to 2030, the path of diversity. When plants cooperate, they don't just fertilize, the beings fertilize the soil with nitrogen, but they give you all the nourishment you need. And we shifted from the measurement, the fictitious measurement of board log of yield per acre to nutrition per acre. And nutrition per acre is much higher when you use native seeds, when you do MILPA, when you do organic. Each step is adding nutrition because your work is to take care of nutrition, to take care of the food cycle. I say food is the currency of life. And women are the ones who grow this currency. Women increase this currency because they grow it with love. Health. When you have good ecological food and biodiversity is health, everything is showing that the biodiversity outside and the biodiversity within us is the link between health. We need more biodiversity outside, and our gut microbiome is diverse, 100 trillion microbes. When that is disturbed, either for lack of food or by toxics, you get all the diseases. All diseases begin in the gut microbiome. Inequality. If I grow food, healthy food for my community, the food doesn't become too costly for the buyer, and the farmer doesn't get his income dropped. Our research has shown that in global trade, the farmers in the global supply chains, farmers are receiving 1% of what the consumer pays, 1%. 99% goes to the agribusiness. So when you have local economies, you have much more equality. Climate, by healing the cycles of carbon, of nitrogen, healing Mother Earth. Through earth care, we can address climate change. The figures are there. You can do 10 tons of organic matter in the soil. In 10 years, we can reverse climate change. We don't need nitrogen to run off into the oceans. The oceans will be pure. And as our farm, Navdanya, we've seen, we saved seeds and we saved biodiversity. We've saved 4,000 varieties of rice, but on our farm we grow 750 because other climates have their own rices. We grow 250 wheats. We do every kind of bean and pulse that can grow here. But we just grew the plants, and then the butterflies came back and the pollinators came back. And then we did research to show that 1/3 of the food increased because there was more pollinators. 6-fold increase in pollinators. Our fellow producers are the pollinators, the earthworms, the mycorrhizae in the soil. We have to be co-creators with the earth. We are not masters. We are not dominators, but women are showing the way to co-creation. And through this, we are addressing every one of the emergencies that we are facing. The transition we are making towards 2030 is a shift from illusions of separation and superiority to the embodied, vibrant, lived reality of an earth family in interconnectedness and oneness. From seeing nature and humans as raw materials to be exploited and manipulated, to seeing all beings as relative, unique in our diversity, but equal in our rights to live and share our common home. From violence as the organizing principle to non-violence in our minds, our hearts, our actions, our relationships. From external control, domination, subjugation, and manipulation to self-organization and evolution through mutuality, partnership, and participation. From monocultures and uniformity to diversity, multiplicity, pluralism. From the reductionist mechanical minds to ecological minds. From diseconomies of extractivism and limitless greed destroying the earth to living circular economies, regenerating life through giving and the law of return. From enclosing the commons and monopolizing nature's gifts to reclaiming the commons, sharing her gifts with gratitude. From competition to cooperation, from destruction and degeneration to co-creation and regeneration, from laws written by the colonizers, corporations, and the capitalist patriarchs to laws written by the earth, by women working with the earth, by the land, which have been followed by indigenous cultures and women and sustained life. The present path guarantees breakdown and ecological and social collapse. A shift to earth-centric, women-centric economies is imperative to survival by co-creating the possibility of resilience, recovery, restoration, repair, regeneration. Humanity has a possibility of a future if we learn from nature, from women, from indigenous people, how to evolve living economies based on care for the earth. As I have said often, either we will have a future where the earth and women rise and lead the way on the path of life and love, or humanity will not have a future at all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva, for that conference. It was an amazing collection of thoughts and ideas and historical experiences. So thank you so much for that. Let me just switch a little bit into Spanish. A todo nuestro auditorio, sabemos que va a haber probablemente muchas preguntas y muchas inquietudes que quererle hacer llegar a la doctora Shiva. Tenemos el tiempo un poquito limitado, solamente tendremos aquí hasta las 12 del día, así que les pedimos por favor que, bueno, nos ayuden a poner sus preguntas en la sección de preguntas y respuestas para que podamos nosotros ir tomándolas y tratar de trabajarlas para tratar de sintetizarlas y hacérselas llegar a la doctora Vandana Shiva. Dr. Shiva, I think we are in a very special moment in time, right? Because we're exactly in that point that we really need to act very fast and to take global decisions in trying to stop what is happening in terms of climate change and in terms of depletion of different resources. I think it would be very interesting if you tell us a little bit about how your movement and everything that you have been doing in the last 20 to 30 years, trying to change the narrative regarding organic production, the role of women in agriculture, and trying to go against what you have said, the terrorism of these transnational companies that are trying to push not only technology, but also to trying to control production and crops creation in different countries. So tell us a little bit about how has been the advance in India. At this point, what is the percentage of small scale and medium scale producers that have switched to more organic based ways of production? How would you say that this whole movement is advancing in India? And what are the obstacles to move forward?
Well, the first thing is India is a land of small farmers, and the peasants of India have always risen every time there was an attempt to destroy small farms, including, I don't know if you followed, for about 4 months now, the small farmers have been protesting against deregulation of markets, which would absolutely decimate them. But these laws were put in place in a framework of a structural adjustment by the World Bank in 1991, and we've resisted it for 30 years. The government only tracks the certified organic farmers. I trained more than 1 million in organic farming, and I know as the economy becomes more difficult, we get a polarization of choices for farmers. Some go deeper into debt and buy the next seed and the next chemical, and others say no more. But we don't have a national system. But what I can say is, when I gave you the title of Earth Rising, Women Rising, it's from a report that's been prepared by our team and the peasant women we work with. And it's available on the Navdanya website. And here, entire villages are going organic. My state went organic. Sikkim went organic. I worked with 7 states that made policies to shift to organic. We are right now, you said, what are the obstacles? We don't really have an obstacle as much as a hijack. Yeah. The difference between India and Mexico right now is you are actually saying no to these corporations in a very clear way. The next step of industrial agriculture is the industrializing of information and knowledge, which is called the digital agriculture. Yeah, farming without farmers, turning data into a commodity. And I always say, data is not information because it adds to nothing. You add data and turn it into a package of information. Information is not knowledge. Knowledge is not wisdom. Our indigenous cultures and women have the wisdom. They have the knowledge. They might not be moving information around, and they definitely are not data manipulators. And Bill Gates has called data the new gold. Our big guy who controls the digital system in communication has called it the new oil because he came from oil. So they're looking at money for this. And just this morning, I was briefing a group who have very close links to government, who are worried that Microsoft has contracts now with the agriculture ministry. So digital agriculture is kind of the Trojan horse. They say, and then they say, oh, but it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything because you're not doing anything, but it does. And I'll give you 3 examples. And again, I would invite you all to go to our website to read both my blogs and our new reports. Today, we've released a new report on Earth democracy, connecting rights of Mother Earth with human rights and the well-being of all. And these other reports we did a few days ago, and for the connections between the CIMET and India, I've done a report called Reclaim the Seed. People think digital agriculture, oh, they'll just collect a bit of information. No, no, no. Bill Gates has emerged as the biggest landlord of America, and you're next door. They've destroyed your common land for greed for land. If he realizes land is a big asset, he's going to move southwards too. But he isn't just buying land as an asset. He's buying land because he wants to create conditionalities through the fake solutions in this book. One of the fake solutions is called net zero. It is not reducing emissions. It is continuing emissions, continuing pollution. He's flying around endlessly on his private jet. Yeah. Ordinary people have emissions, he doesn't, yeah, because he has offsets. And offsets means taking the small peasants and locking them into a new conditionality. He is creating through a company in which he has huge investments, some Cottonwood Ag or something, where they've taken the big environmentalists, big farmers, and him, the billionaire. They're creating new conditionalities for trade in offsets, trade in carbon. And they're working on the idea that farmers aren't there to grow food and health for all. Farmers are there to be sinks of our pollution. And we will pay them a little bit through a financial erratic market of the kind that collapsed for the carbon in their soil, not for the nourishment in their food. And that means an insult to Mother Earth, because the earth gives you every nutrition. She gives you zinc and magnesium and potassium and phosphorus, calcium, not just carbon. So you're destroying the capacity of the earth to produce nutrition. You're destroying the capacity of the farmer to produce wholesome food. And they've got the system totally worked out, and it's all in this book. Get rid of the farmers from the land, take their land, the few who remain, lock them in conditionalities, have no real food. Why on earth should the Mexicans eat tortillas, and why should Indians eat chapatis, make fake food? Why should mothers feed their babies with breast milk, make lab milk, and patent it as a climate solution? It's patented. Lab-made breast milk, fake milk, is patented as a climate solution under a grant by Bill Gates. So we are in this amazing situation of fake green, fake food, fake science, fake news, and on the other hand, Mother Earth and women standing together saying, here's the truth.
You have been very outspoken and trying to underline many of these issues in different global forums. But what can poor farmers around the world do against this? When people like Bill Gates are negotiating these kinds of policies with different states around the world, what can the social movements and small-scale farmers around the world can do about it?
Well, just take your own example in Mexico. It was the bottom-up movement of small-scale farmers who said, we don't want GMOs, who said, we don't want glyphosate. And then movements joined hands, and eventually you got a government decision. Of course, I've witnessed what happened to the environment minister with the attacks on him. I'm witnessing how Mr. Biden is being used to make trade threats against Mexico. We know a whole arsenal will be deployed. We organized the Monsanto Tribunal. And what I did, it was 2017, we said we're going to bring together everyone who has been a victim of Monsanto to just see the levels of the crime. The Argentinians suffering from cancer, the Percy Smythers who had been sued for saving his seed, the farmers of India who had committed suicide, French farmers, farmers from Africa, from Burkina Faso. And that tribunal then made it so clear that Monsanto was engaged in crimes against nature and against humanity and against scientists and against democracy. Monsanto then was forced to disappear because for the investors, it became a curse. And Bayer thought it would rescue that. But Bayer has sunk since they bought Monsanto. Bayer has lost more money than the value for which they bought Monsanto, which means Monsanto's value is zero. We began small. Now that the billionaires are in charge, and I realized this in 2015 at the Paris summit, where Bill Gates was standing with the heads of state. I said, since when did this shift happen? Heads of state are heads of state. They're elected by their people. Since when did an unelected billionaire not just become equal to them, but superior to them? Something has shifted. That's why I wrote my book, Oneness versus the 1%. We now realize that the billionaires have created impunity for themselves. They are dismantling structures of regulation, dismantling democracies, dismantling national sovereignties. And I'll give you just two examples. So we created biosafety laws. Gates is trying to undermine biosafety. He's bribed European lobbyists $70 million to undo biosafety regulation. And because we have biosafety laws, the Nagoya Protocol, Adelita works a lot on this, that is a work. They're now doing digital genomic mappings to ride under these laws on access. So what do we do in such a time? First, defend what we have put in place, not let it get eroded. The governments haven't disappeared, our sovereignties haven't disappeared. If we allow them to disappear, they will disappear. We've got to defend them. Second, like we did with the Monsanto Tribunal, the idea of people's assemblies has grown from Mexico. We need assemblies everywhere. We need people to create that's why I go talking about earth democracy. Earth democracy for me is the democracy of all life, but it is the democracy of participation by all people in their everyday affairs of life. This living democracy we need to practice. What kind of food do we need? What happens when America threatens you with trade? They did this with us, and I organized villages to make their decision, and we sent postcards to WTO, and WTO had to back off. And I think because you are such close neighbors, I think people's assemblies, participatory democracy, living democracy, and this has been the culture. Right? So I have never found small peasants as powerless people. They have always changed history. You are the land where Zapatistas, where Zapata rose. Yeah, he was a peasant.
Of course, thank you so much for that answer. I'll introduce a question from our audience. It has to do with the violence created with the drug cartels around Mexico. So the question is, what are the alternatives that rural women have to transform territories in which violence led by drug cartels, illegal logging, and adverse weather conditions like droughts are happening in different parts of Mexico, but I know that in India as well, you have some issues as well going on around the country. Yeah. So please give us your thoughts.
In the many years when I came to Mexico to support the campaign of no country, without maize, there's no country, and for a GMO-free Mexico. And I remember a particular public hearing in Oaxaca, where an economist gave the data that ever since NAFTA and free trade, as livelihoods were destroyed of peasants, workers, 1/3 of the economy moved into the criminal economy. So every time you destroy the living economy of meaning, of identity, of community, you get the emergence of sex trafficking and drug cartels. So the alternative is create living economies, yeah? But create living economies not in isolation, realizing that we have to have resilience. Resilience comes from diversity, but it also comes from interconnectedness. So that if in a particular area there was a drought, other areas are available. And so you need multi-layered diversity of economies. You need multi-layered oceanic links between economies. And creating an economy of the earth, with the earth, for the earth is the alternative to the drug cartel. As is it's the alternative. I mean, at the end of it, if you think of it, who are the multinationals? Who are the Poison Cartel? Who are the people pushing GMO maize and glyphosate on you? IG Farmer, Bayer. You know what Bayer has always talked about in terms of aspirin? The first drug that Bayer made was heroin. And the name was given because it makes you feel like a hero. And I even have an old photo of a bottle of heroin that they made. So they are the drug cartel. And they are the pharmaceutical industry, yeah? So the agrochemical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and local drug cartels are one continuity of unnecessary addictions and unnecessary criminalization of society. And that's why we need we need the small steps, but with a large vision. We will only be able to move the system with another narrative. And that is what will give the confidence to people. I mean, we've come through the British pushing 60 million people to famine, 2 million in the 1942 Bengal famine. And we just decided we are going to regenerate our economy around food. Yeah. So we came out of famine. And I think all of us, if we say this globalized, industrialized agriculture system is such a big part of social and ecological problems. We're going to begin. It could be in some places, 3 villages will be able to be strong enough. Other places, it could be a living democracy zone of 20 villages. In some places, it could be a whole region. But I don't think we need to set and say, this is my Cartesian scale. We've got to begin by saying, this is what is possible for me to do. This is my inner power. This is my solidarity. And with that, work outwards.
Thank you so much for that. I think there are some questions in the audience that relate to GMOs. And if there should be, if they have some kind of possibility, for example, in terms of trying to alleviate hunger. And I think a lot of the people want to know what you think about GMOs. I think we know that you're against GMOs in general. But maybe a follow-up question to that would be if biotech and geoengineering should be limited in their scope regarding the intervention on different resources. So maybe you can talk a little bit about both issues, your perspective on GMOs, and then if we should limit technology.
You know, I mean, it would be stupid of me to say I'm against a tool, right? I am against untested deployment of tools without assessing their risks, without assessing their impacts. So I'm for biosafety. And if through the honest, scientific, democratic scrutiny, an organism comes through, I'm not going to make a predetermined condition. But, you know, when I started this work, there were no GMOs. 87, there were no GMOs. It was the idea of patenting that I was against, because it's not true. Monsanto doesn't invent the seed. It's not a machine. They can't have intellectual property on it. I was very clearly on ethical grounds, on epistemological grounds, on ontological grounds, on scientific grounds. I realized that was wrong. But I had done the Green Revolution study, and the Green Revolution was sold as a miracle, and in textbooks, it's still a miracle. The propaganda machine, it's still a miracle. But I had watched people die in my country, in Punjab. And I realized that the propaganda is here. The reality is here. At that point, I started to realize the difference. So I said, if the Green Revolution could do this, maybe genetic engineering could do all that and worse, because it rides on chemicals. So I started to define the framework for biosafety when no one was doing it. And I was appointed by the UN to be part of I was the only non-governmental member of the framework expert group to design the UN Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. And we put in place the impact on biodiversity must be assessed, the impact on public health must be assessed, and later my country added, and the impact on socioeconomic conditions must be assessed. That time we were anticipating and saying this must be done. Now, 25 years later, Mexico has experience, India has experience, US has experience, only 2 traits: Roundup resistant crops. Look at the devastation in America. Bt toxin, cotton. Look at the devastation in India. At that time, you know, I was treated like I'm being crazy. But every scientist who has studied the Bt cotton situation has had to admit the farmers did get into debt. They did commit suicide, that it hasn't worked to control pests. They're super pests. More pesticides are being sprayed. It hasn't worked. It's a failed technology. So the first generation GMOs, out by experience. Second generation GMOs, if you look, you know, they talk of gene editing as equal to natural. 2 things. Number one, for one gene shifted, 1,500 other genes go to the wrong place. And the entire fabric of an organized living system is dismembered. And more scientists are saying this is not a precise technology. Therefore, you need to govern biosafety. This is why Gates is bribing Europe to say, no, don't count this as a GMO. Yeah, it is a GMO. Third, the question of hunger and nutrition. In 2000, they brought a golden rice. The first place it was introduced was, the experiments were introduced in India. And I did a very quick calculation. I said, rice for vitamin A I did a quick calculation. So they say they'll have this much vitamin A in this rice, but we have this plant and this plant and this plant and this plant, 500%, 600% higher vitamin A. Why would you take a rice and try to make it produce vitamin A when you have all of these amazing plants? Just grow the vegetables, grow the carrot, eat the carrot, you know. Today, 20 years later, and I wrote a piece called The Blind Approach to Blindness Prevention. And then I wrote The Golden Rice Hoax, because there was a lobbyist who accused me of killing 200 million Indian children. I killed 200 million children by showing that this fiction they want to produce in the future doesn't exist. You know, something that doesn't exist was supposed to have saved children. Yeah. Right now, Bill Gates is financing this in Mexico. It's called golden rice. So if you're thinking of removing vitamin A deficiency, it has failed again. A, because there are better alternatives. B, the vitamin A doesn't stay, it disappears. It doesn't stay in the rice. You know, we have rice. I mean, my mother used to store rice for 10 years and 15 years. Now, if you have a rice whose vitamin A doesn't stay, what's the point of growing it? Because you have 80 patents related to it. And that is the main reason. So, you know, my earlier assessments were on the basis of a scientific experience of the Green Revolution. Today, my assessments are on the basis of the scientific research done on the impact. Some of it I've done, but they're actual genetic engineers and molecular biologists. And you have one of the best heading your Science and Technology Council, Elena. And these are not people who don't know the field. People who don't know the field are the ones in businesses who say, good idea, let's pretend. And they do the public relations before they do the science. But you can't substitute science with public relations.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think there's also some questions regarding intellectual property of genetic resources in diversity. So would you talk a little bit about that? Where are we now in terms of the global agenda, and what needs to be done in order to strengthen still each country's capability to protect its own resources?
Yeah. So we are again at the 1992-91 moment, where the Monsantos of the world and the United States helping them have said, the biodiversity of the South, the seeds of the South should be an open access system, which we should take, and then we'll patent it and sell it back to them. And because of the 1987 meeting where the corporations laid this agenda out clearly, I got involved in the issue of seed. I was already involved in the issue of biodiversity because of my work on the Green Revolution. We put in place national laws. You have national sovereignty laws. We have a patent law which says plant, animals, and seeds are not human inventions, therefore not patentable. We have a Biodiversity Act that makes biodiversity a national sovereign system, and access to it to be governed through an access and benefit sharing system, out of which grew the Nagoya Protocol, of which Mexico is also a member. So the Nagoya Protocol is a protocol of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And then because a lot of this was around seed, the companies wanted to take our seeds, then patent it and sell it back to us. In FAO, an amazing person called Pepe Esquinas, for about 20 years, slogged and slogged and slogged and created a plant genetic resources treaty called the Seed Treaty, which recognized farmers' rights and national sovereignty over resources, which is like the Nagoya Protocol. So what is the threat right now? The threat is, Gates has taken all the seeds of the world. The CGIAR system is in his pockets. This is in my new article, Reclaim the Seed, which is on my blog on the Navdanya website. He is then doing what he's very good at, digital mapping. Yeah. So when the colonizers came, they just made maps. Yeah. So much of a part of Mexico was put into America by a map. You know, they just drew a line. They just drew a line and cut off parts of Mexico. So the colonizers made maps. What Gates is doing, because he has access to all the seeds of the world, these days what is very possible to do, when there's a seed in a seed bank, there's a label, there's a passport with it. And the passport says, this variety collected from this peasant, corn variety drought prone. Yeah? So you collect all the corn varieties drought prone, and then put them through a machine, and through an artificial intelligence software, it reads what's the common part of the genome, and then they take a patent. This digital genome sequencing, it's called, a digital genome sequence information, I just call it digital genome mapping, is like the colonial map, is now being used to stamp ownership. But because this is being done digitally through ex situ collections, which were taken from us, they're not going through the Nagoya Protocol. They're not going through the Seed Treaty. And Gates has actually admitted that it is very laborious to obey these international laws. And therefore we need digitalization of genomic data. For him, digitalization of genomic data is both the path of patenting and undercutting laws. So what do we need to do? Defend national laws and hugely defend international laws that have been put in place. And in fact, I think we need new thinking on tools and technology, because this is the way the new empires, the new civilizing mission, the first civilizing mission was religion, which killed all local faiths. The new civilizing mission is technology for money making. It's the new religion. And all you say is technology, but it's technology, but technology is a tool. And I always say, okay, what does the tool use and what does it produce? What is its ecological cost? What is its social benefit or social cost? We need a new elevation in international negotiation and national treaties that says it does, a seed is a seed. The sovereignty is on the seed. Biodiversity is biodiversity. The sovereignty is the biodiversity. It doesn't matter how you describe it. It doesn't matter what tool you use to describe it. You could describe it through a chemical formula. You could describe it through a digital map, but the seed and its integrity is the seed. And that's why we can't have tools displacing the integrity of the biodiversity and the seed, and tools being used to undermine sovereignty. This is the new thinking that is needed at national levels and at international levels. But the international system is a collection of national systems. And when even 2 or 3 countries are strong, the international system is strong. But when only the pirates are strong in the international system, they pirate.
Thank you so much for that. I think there's a lot of questions regarding tools and regarding methodologies and how to address, for example, gender inequalities of different aspects. Maybe, for example, access to land, which also in India is an issue, as well as in Mexico, still for women especially. But what would be some of your advices or your experiences building this methodological experience to put together development projects on the local ground and trying to address many of the issues that create inequality at the local level?
Yeah. So the first is that land was a commons. It was not private property till colonialism. The enclosures of the commons happened first in England, and then they also happened at the same time in the colonies. In India, it was Lord Cornwallis, and I have 3 volumes on this, Ecological History of Food and Farming in India, how overnight England declared itself owner of India and the land of India. And then they made themselves the landlords, and they appointed local landlords who were their rent collectors. They call them the zamindars. The Indian movements were always about undoing landlordism. And we had land reform. I think the next step, which is what the women I work with are engaged. There's a very famous American feminist who said you can't use the master's tools to bring down the master's house. Now, the master's tools are privatization. Yeah? Our tools are reclaiming the commons. And reclaiming the commons of seed, reclaiming the knowledge of commons of knowledge. And the women that I work with are reclaiming their commons of land. They're saying we'll do community farming. And that is the strongest way to overcome inequality, both because when they work together, they are stronger, they're not marginal anymore. They're a powerful unit, politically and economically. Second, when they are together, they overcome all scarcities, all restrictions. And third, most importantly, they become their own resilience. They become an organized force to decide which way the village will go, which way a food system will go.
Thank you so much. We have only 10 more minutes, so I'm going to start trying to close a little bit with a broad question, and I'm trying to put three different questions together that were sent by the audience. There's still a big divide between rural areas and urban areas. So right now it seems that people working very close to the land are much more conscious about the consequences of using agrochemicals and other kinds of situations that can damage the land. But on the urban areas, there's some movements trying also to address sustainability and organic products, consumers, of course. But what should be, do you believe that people taking individual actions, like not buying certain products or buying certain products or recycling their own garbage, are they useful? And what would you say to the youth, not only in Mexico, but around the world, because we have people that are from other countries at this point watching your conference. What would you say to the youth of the world that should be their actions forward, and also to women? What would be your message to women that are trying to change things?
Yeah, so of course one has to personally do the right thing. But to imagine that no other level of change is needed would be an illusion, which is exactly the illusion that the destroyers and polluters have tried to trap us and say, oh, just separate your garbage. And I've had to fight cases where all of the Europeans separated their garbage and the blue bin and the green bin. And then all of this was accumulated and put on a ship and sent to countries like India. And I had to fight cases in our Supreme Court. The toxic waste, the garbage, the plastics. So the individual action has to be embedded in a total assessment of the system of which we are a part. Yeah. So we have to do the personal, and that's why our slogan has always been the personal is political, but the political is personal too. And whatever we do, we have to do with deep awareness of how the system works. And where are the systemic changes we need to make? Individual choices for food and choosing organic will not be enough for two reasons. Organic was the affordable food in most places. Yeah. Processed was more expensive in the early stages. Then they started to subsidize. 780 billion is the chemical food subsidy, the agribusiness subsidy. Every junk food gets huge subsidies. Our tax money is used to make us sick. So what we have is bad food has been made cheap, and real food has been made expensive because all the subsidies go in this direction. And then when you have a monopoly, you push the farmer's price down. So you buy cheap anyway, which is why the Walmarts can always sell cheap, and why the Amazons can always give you 60% off, because they're already ripping up the original producer. And what happened with organic is going to happen with real food if we allow the fake food enterprise of Bill Gates to grow. Why do you need a tortilla? No, I'll just mix a few things. And then they'll say real food is a luxury. So like they're saying organic is a luxury. So we have to be part of changing the food system. while we make the correct choices, because your body is yours and you'd better not punish it, but to make sure the economics of organic and economics of real food and economics of agroecology and the economics of local economies shifts, that's a political project. And you're in a country where there is a willingness to make this shift. For the young people, I will say, especially the young women, all these hierarchies that were created by separation of women being less than men, of farmers being less, you always, oh, you're better off in a city, you're better off in a city, you're better off in a city. When the lockdown of the COVID happened, 139 million people who were migrant laborers had to leave the city because there was nothing. In a lockdown, there's no food in the city. They all walked for thousands of miles, someone 1,200 miles, someone else 2,000 miles, walked till they got home with a little piece of land. But because the incomes are so unequal, that you go to a city and work on something very bad, you'll get more income. And the farmer's income has been pushed down. What we have is this push towards the city and then a dispossession. So I think for all young people, for the last 36 years, I realized food and farming is the most important place to be. And now with all of my new thinking and writing, saying that earth care is the biggest work we can do, the biggest service to the earth. And earth care through agriculture is the highest vocation. So to be a farmer today, to me, is the highest commitment we can reach. And the young people have to be very innovative to see how through collecting together, they can create cooperative farms, collective farms, how they can create food communities, get food directly from farmers to cities. It's happening, I know. I've eaten in some wonderful places in Mexico City where young people are doing it. And to the young women, I would say, we ran the care economy and it was treated as not an economy. It was treated as non-work. The care economy is the future economy. What we have to do is give respect to ourselves, give respect to Mother Earth, and fight for our rights.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Shiva. We still have a lot of questions. I think we have a very participatory audience today. Questions about traditional knowledge appropriation, questions about ecofeminism. Also, a lot of people would like to know where to find you. People in Mexico, they have a lot of projects. I would love to share them with you and to have a closer contact. So I don't know if you would just like to finish up saying something in these general terms, in terms of ecofeminism or traditional knowledge appropriation or biopiracy. There are so many issues. So please just try to round up maybe in 2 minutes, and then we'll have to finish this amazing conference. So Dr. Shiva, some closing words?
So the hierarchies that have put women below men, that put traditional knowledge as if it was a knowledge, then pirated it, are all these extractions created through illusions. And we will only overcome them when from ourselves we say, but I am not less. We are equal. And we do the work to realize by traditional knowledge, our traditional knowledge is sophisticated. It's way ahead of mechanistic reductionist science. I did quantum theory, but I've done a lot of work on traditional knowledge, fighting biopiracy cases. So we have to regenerate our cultures, our knowledges, our democracies, and most importantly, as the title of today's conferences, we have to follow the earth rising and women rising. They're rising. We don't have to lift them. I always say, I've had many debates with leaders, how do we lift the women out of poverty? I said, you just get your backs off. You get off our backs, and women are rising anyway. We don't need empowerment. We need to get rid of disempowerment. And this moment is a moment for countries like Mexico, for countries like India, as long as we do not let the new colonizers take over, because their house of cards is very unstable, ecologically for the earth, socially for our societies. Happy Women's Earth Day, which is a Women's Day, which is Mother Earth Day, to all of you, and thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva, so much for being with us today. And we thank also our audience. Muchas gracias a todos por haber estado el día de hoy con nosotros. Le agradecemos mucho a la doctora Shiva su tiempo, su conocimiento, el haber compartido con nosotros todas estas ideas. Y nos despedimos nada más invitándolos a nuestra siguiente sesión que se llevará a cabo el 20 de mayo, en donde estará con nosotros la doctora Alicia Bárcenas, directora ejecutiva de la CEPAL. Así que esperamos también volver a contar con su participación la próxima vez. Y a todos y a todas, efectivamente que sea un excelente día de la Tierra. Dr. Shiva, thank you again for your words.
Thank
And
you.
we hope to see you in
Thank
Mexico.
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Gracias nuevamente a nuestro auditorio y muchas gracias también a todo el equipo técnico de la COUS y de la Secretaría de Desarrollo Institucional y a nuestro equipo también de traductores que estuvieron con nosotros en esta sesión. Le haremos llegar, quedamos con eso con la doctora Shiva, las preguntas que no pudieron ser contestadas y también en la página de la COUS vamos a publicar algunas de las publicaciones que ella nos va a compartir para todo el público en México. Nuevamente a todos, muchas gracias por habernos acompañado en esta importante conferencia. Buenas tardes.